And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Remember to hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out. Trying to reach 300 by the end of the week. Let's see if we can make it happen. Now, as far as the today's topic, we're going to go over the AL East, get a prediction for what's going to happen this year. A lot of different takes as far as who you think is going to be the best. But in my opinion, this decision has already been made, at least as of right now. There's four teams really vying for the top of this division. It's going to be really competitive all year long. But there's one team that's really kind of solidified themselves, and we'll get into that shortly. But without further ado, let's get started at the top of the list and go with the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, their lineup has really been solidified over the last couple of years with young talent proving themselves, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and also outside additions, Matt Chapman this year, George Springer the year before. They've really bolstered this roster up and down, so let's kind of go through it line by line. First, the lineup itself. Springer's going to be your leadoff hitter again. Bo Bichette's probably going to follow him in the two-hole. Really good 1-2 combination there. On-base guys, power guys, those kinds of things. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. established himself as one of the top two first basemen in all of baseball last year. Freddie Freeman, for my money, is still the best first baseman in the game, but he's right there. If we get another year of great production out of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., he will be the best first baseman in the game. Defense is a little bit lacking for him compared to Freeman, but he's still very good at that position. Overall, this lineup is very lengthy as we get through the list. Number 4, you're in the 4-hole, you're going to have Teoscar Hernandez. He's performed very well for the Blue Jays. In the 5-hole, after a down year last year by his standards anyway, the Oakland A's traded Matt Chapman to the Blue Jays for a package of prospects. For the Oakland A's, they were just looking to rebuild. For the Toronto Blue Jays, though, they needed to solidify that offense. They still are going to have quite a few different options for them to kind of plug and play at different spots, and they still might go out and go after one of the top trade deadline targets out there as well. But for my money, Matt Chapman takes over that number 5 spot and plays third base. Lourdes Gurriel, the other Gurriel brother in the league right now, is going to be your left fielder this year. Hopefully he can still be one of the better defenders in the league. If he can still provide that offense that he's provided over the last year or so, that'll be a nice boost for them if he can perform in that 6-hole. 7, Alejandro Kirk, young guy as well. Kevin Biggio in the 8-hole. He is the one guy that they might have looked to replace by trading for a guy like Jose Ramirez from the Cleveland Guardians. Remains to be seen if they end up doing that in season, but for right now, Kevin Biggio, if he has a breakout year, they don't need to go out and make that trade for a guy like Jose Ramirez. Catcher, of course, is already solidified with Danny Jansen as well. On to the rotation. The rotation itself, Jose Barrios, they signed him to a 7-year extension this offseason anyway. Kevin Gausman takes over that number 2 spot as Robbie Ray goes to the Seattle Mariners. Gausman figured out some things with the San Francisco Giants last year. That was the surprise team last year. The San Francisco Giants got 107 wins, and Gausman was a big part of that. Of course, their offense played above their heads, but Gausman really seemed to take a step that last year. If he can continue that success that he found in San Francisco, in Toronto, we're looking at a very strong rotation with Barrios and Gausman as the 1-2. Now, Ryu was the free agent addition that they made about a year ago, and he's performed well ever since he's come to Toronto. Very steady in the starting rotation. When he was with the Dodgers, he almost won the Cy Young, even with limited innings. That tells you just how good, high-quality innings he provides. If he continues that same thing that he's already done years and years and years now in the league, the Toronto should have a very good rotation. Manoah is going to be the young guy in the rotation, so we'll see if he can establish himself as a major league starter. Last in the starting rotation is going to be Kikuchi. The contract kind of surprised me after we saw him kind of get beat up last year. 3 and 36, I believe, is what the Blue Jays ended up giving him. We'll see if he can correct some of those mistakes that he had at the end of the year last year with the Mariners. Overall, this is a very very good lineup. Matt Chapman's addition kind of solidifies their infield defense and gives them some veteran leadership among a very young team. He and George Springer, both from the AL West, should provide some leadership for them. The starting rotation is much better now with the additions of Barrios and Gausman at the top. We'll see if they're going to miss out on Robbie Ray, even though Gausman should basically give you that same production. The one prospect they could have in the minors anyway is Gabriel Moreno. He should be coming up fairly soon. He could probably make his debut probably around August, maybe even July. He probably won't break camp with them, though. But for right now, the Blue Jays lineup looks pretty solid. Let us know in the comment section what you think of the lineup overall. The next team I want to kind of touch on is going to be the Baltimore Orioles. Now, they're not exactly going to compete for a playoff spot. However, this is all about getting the young players in the lineup and getting to see or seeing if they can produce and make that next step to being a major league regular. Now, of course, you hope that your number one pick, of course, turns out to be that guy. Adley Rutschman is probably their best prospect right now. He probably will break camp with them if he hadn't been hurt, but he should eventually be there. Robin Citrinos was signed in the offseason to take over that catcher spot, but the prospect should take over that as the season progresses. For the Orioles, the best player on their team right now, Cedric Mullins, kind of had a breakout last year. We'll see if he can continue that progress. Center fielders, athletic, good, rangy, that hit for average are few and far between. So possibly a trade candidate here, especially with this contract being so low on a rookie value deal. The biggest name on their roster right now, Trey Mancini, cancer survivor and all that. Very good, very happy for him that he's able to put that behind him and move forward. He is in the final year of his deal, though, with the Orioles. A lot of history there, a lot of fan base support for Trey Mancini, but I don't expect him to be there throughout the season. I expect him to be dealt at the deadline for a team that needs a corner outfield bat, first baseman, DH type of guy. The other names that they brought in over the offseason are kind of one-year stopgap players like Rougned Odor. Maybe they can catch lightning in a bottle and see if he can figure out how to hit for average again like he did in the minors. Ever since he's come to the big leagues, he's scrapped that approach and gone for the home run, long ball, or nothing, and it just hasn't worked out. He was hoping to get one of those mega deals. He did get a really nice extension from the Rangers a few years back, but that extension, of course, they decided to go ahead and cut bait with him and move forward. We'll see if they can get something there. From the starting staff, they got a whole bunch of one-year deals and young guys there. John Means is the best starter they have. He will likely be dealt. Kind of surprising he wasn't dealt this offseason. But he's their best starter right now. Jordan Lyles figures to be their number 2. That tells you all you need to know about where the Orioles rotation stands right now, and a bunch of youth behind it. There's a lot of prospects beneath them, none of them really high-touted prospects or anything like that from the starting staff. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Now let's get on to the other teams that will be competing for playoff positioning this year. First, the Tampa Bay Rays. The Tampa Bay Rays, of course, they always seem to kind of have a lineup or a new lineup every single day, so I won't go line by line with you with this one just because it's going to change so much. Randy Arozarena, of course, had the big breakout postseason a year and a half ago. Last year, the Rookie of the Year, that kind of a thing. Austin Meadows had a little bit of a regression last year, but he's the number 1 most impacted by the shift. This year, he, of course, will still have to deal with the shift, but next year, after the shifts are no longer going to be around, expect him to take off in his career. I will discuss another player who's affected by the shift later on in this. That's on the New York Yankees. Yandi Diaz, the one player they did get from the now the Guardians anyway, in that trade about a year and a half ago. He's started to come into his own as a Tampa Bay Ray. He kind of fits what they're looking for in their players. Joey Wendell doesn't figure to be an everyday player for them, but he figures to fill in at a number of different spots for them. So we'll see what kind of success they can have. Mike Cenino has solidified himself as a very solid big league catcher. The Mariners, when they traded him at that time, didn't think he was going to be able to hit enough average or homers to be able to justify the playing time that you'd be getting. Boy, have they been proven wrong. If you're trading with the Rays, you might want to think about that one more time just to make sure you're doing the right thing, because it seems like every trade that the Rays make works out in their favor. Kevin Kiermeier returns for another season. He's probably one of the more higher paid Rays on the roster right now. Kind of surprising that they didn't either trade him or move on from that contract. But it just seems to be the way the Rays have done those kinds of things. But he sticks around. He's probably going to be splitting time with Manny Margot in the outfield. They also have Brett Phillips to kind of take some time back there as well. A number of young prospects, of course, to come up. Josh Lowe is out there as well. Taylor Wall, the infield prospect, maybe he sees some time. Played well at AAA Durham. Those kinds of things. So we'll see what kind of lineup they end up having. From a rotation perspective, they've had a young rotation for almost a solid decade now or more. They always seem to find new young arms to put in that rotation. They're not afraid to go with multi-inning relievers. They usually don't name a closer, which is very different from most teams. They like to have that 9th inning guy locked down, always know what to expect out of him. If you were to kind of name a closer, I guess you could say it was Andrew Kittredge, but we'll see. As the season progresses, who ends up back there. But the only real veteran that they have in their starting staff is Corey Kluber, Yankees last year, and then went on to the Rays. We'll see if he has any rebound of success there with the Rays. But again, if you're the Rays, they always seem to find that extra value out of players. Maybe the Yankees moved on from Kluber a little too soon. Remains to be seen, but it'll be very interesting seeing Kluber go up against the Yankees this year. Shane McClanahan is at the top of the rotation this year. Drew Rasmussen's going to be there. Luis Patino, the former prospect of the San Diego Padres, is going to be in there as well. And Ryan Yarbrough. We'll see if we get a full season out of him and see what kind of production he can do from that starting staff. The next team on this list is going to be the Boston Red Sox. For my money, this is all about Trevor Story's addition, how it affects Xander Bogaerts, Kike Hernandez, how their loss of Freddie Freeman allows the Bobby Dahlbecks of the world to take over first base. But it's all going to hinge on that lineup. The starting staff is going to be without two of their starters to start the season. Both Chris Sale is not going to be available to start the year. Eovaldi is probably going to be your number one starter throughout the entire season. So we'll see what kind of production they can get out of those starters. They are going to miss Martin Perez and Garrett Richards from an innings perspective. They did bring in Rich Hill and Michael Wacha to kind of fill in those spots. So we'll see if they can get some more juice out of those veterans. But that starting staff is a little bit light, so we'll see what they end up doing. The starting lineup itself, Xander Bogaerts is still going to play shortstop for you. Trevor Story is going to be your everyday second baseman. It remains to be seen what happens after this season as far as whether or not they bring back Xander Bogaerts. They've already tried discussing a contract extension with him, and it seems like they've got their insurance policy now if they aren't able to do so. Kike Hernandez figures to fill in at a number of different positions, but right now, probably pencil him in for the most starts in center field. Jackie Bradley Jr. was one of the more interesting trades of the offseason. They traded away Hunter Renfroe and I believe some money or prospect. I can't remember what they attached to that. But they also got Jackie Bradley Jr. in this deal. Jackie Bradley Jr. is a very good defender. He's just getting older. The wheels aren't what they once were. The one thing that's regressed the most for him, though, is the bat. Let us know in the comments section what you think of the move for a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., because I don't see the reason for it. He's not going to play center field for you because you have Kike Hernandez back there. You got other infielders that could flex out to that outfield spot. So I didn't understand the loss of Hunter Renfroe's bat to get the defense of a Jackie Bradley Jr. Let me know in the comment section if you can explain to me the reason for getting a Jackie Bradley Jr. other than nostalgia, because I don't see it. Youth, again, is going to be the name of the game for Bobby Dahlbeck, and see if he can progress and become a little bit better. A year under his belt, maybe he becomes the next Freddie Freeman out there, but that's asking a lot of Bobby Dahlbeck. That's why they were in the running for Freddie Freeman all the way to the very end. One note on that Freddie Freeman sweepstakes: the Tampa Bay Rays were actually all the way in there. They were all the way in at 6 years, $30 million per year. That is way outside of the norm for the Tampa Bay Rays, but that tells you just how good of a player Freddie Freeman is. To even mention his name when you're talking about a progression of a young guy like Bobby Dahlbeck, high praise, but I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it anyway. Christian Vasquez, of course, is still your catcher. The best player on this team is still Rafael Devers, RBI machine, home runs, all that. He finally solidified himself as a big league star last year, and we'll see what kind of production he brings this year. JD Martinez is still there as well. But this team, for me, is not going to take the division, but they should be very competitive for most of the year. The pitching staff is where I see the most questions on that team. The final team I want to go over is going to be the New York Yankees. Let us know in the comment section if you're a Yankees fan and what you think of all the additions or lack thereof for the Yankees this year, and we'll kind of go over it line by line. Now, as far as the Yankees, they start and end with that shortstop position is where their offseason eye was focused on anyway. There's lots of conversation about Corey Seager, Carlos Correa, Marcus Semien, Javi Baez, Trevor Story to a certain extent as the free agents came off the board. They even discussed a lot as far as Freddie Freeman at first base. However, they end up with Isiah Kiner-Falefa after two of those free agents went off the board to Texas. He got flipped to Minnesota. Minnesota flipped him and Donaldson to take over that third base role for the Yankees in exchange for Gary Sanchez and Gio Urshela. Now, for my money, I would still rather have Carlos Correa, and that might be the one drawback of this team is that they don't have that superstar bat at that shortstop position. They don't have that Derek Jeter at that spot. Carlos Correa is not Derek Jeter, don't get me wrong, but he's a whole lot better than Isiah Kiner-Falefa. Just to tell you the bat-to-ball skills that this team didn't have last year, Isiah Kiner-Falefa, known for his glove, had the most hits or would have had the most hits on the Yankees last year. Tells you all you need to know about what type of hitter the Yankees were needing. Carlos Correa would have brought that in spades. Leadership, all of those kinds of things. Aaron Judge is still there, of course. Joey Gallo did have a down year last year. Remember earlier in the video, I was explaining how the most impacted was Austin Meadows by the shift last year. Joey Gallo was second, and has always been affected by that. He was number one the previous 2 years as well. Next year, when the shift is gone, expect a monster season for Joey Gallo. He hammers the ball pretty much always to the between first base, second base hole. So we'll see if the shift going away next year helps them. But for for this coming season anyway, you're going to have to get on base somehow. He's going to have to figure out a way to spread the ball all over the field. Remains to be seen if he's willing to do that a little bit more often. He's capable of doing it, but the question is, will he do it? It always seems to be that he wants to go for the long ball, and you can't really blame him when you have that prodigious power. Just hitting a pop-up for him goes into the bleachers. That's just telling you how much power he has. If he can just make decent contact half the time, he's going to have a much better year this year. Glaiver Torres looks to have a rebound season as well for the New York Yankees. They finally are going to move him off of shortstop and over to second base. He performed better as the season wore on when he got moved over. Giancarlo Stanton is still on the team. That mega contract is definitely an albatross for them, so they need to get some production out of him. Missed a little bit of time due to injury last year, so we'll see if he's a little bit better. Maybe he's got a little bit better training, but with the lockout this offseason, that's another question, is going to be the health of all these players. New York City Mayor Eric Adams also established an exemption for athletes so that the New York Yankees will actually have all of their players on the field for them, whether or not they're vaccinated or not. Let us know in the comment section how excited you are about that, seeing all of your favorite players on the field, whether or not they are vaccinated or not. Whether your feelings are for or against the vaccine, the fact remains is that this was going to be an issue for the New York Yankees, and they found their way around it. The one thing that I was most surprised by is that they were willing to take on the money for a guy like Josh Donaldson. Now, for my money, he's been one of the best hard hit makes consistent barrel contact whenever he does hit the ball, which is why the Yankees still see some value there. And I can understand why you'd want to go for a Josh Donaldson. However, when you go for him at the expense of a guy like Carlos Correa, I understand he was wanting 10 years, 325 or more to beat the contract of Corey Seager. Instead, he takes a 3-year, 105 with opt-outs after the first and second year from the Twins. That tells me all you need to know about where the Yankees are headed as far as financially. They're looking at Aaron Judge's contract coming up and needing to get that secured. I don't think they trusted themselves to be able to go to the level that they needed to get Aaron Judge under contract, along with a number of other players that they have coming due, if they had another contract on the books like a Carlos Correa. For my money, though, if you can get the contract done now, go ahead and get the guy that you can go ahead and get now, as opposed to maybe in the future signing one of your own guys. Great, you might get to keep one of your own guys, and that might be the better story. But you had a sure thing in Carlos Correa if you just extended him that deal. The Yankees did not, and instead took about the same money by getting Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Josh Donaldson in the deal from the Twins. The one move I will say I did agree with them for, and would have agreed 3 years ago for, is getting rid of Gary Sanchez. Just a liability behind the plate. Always has the pass ball issues pretty much every season. Every single start he makes, he at least has 1 or 2 pass balls. It's been horrible watching him behind the plate. He's just clunky behind the plate. Maybe he can refine that technique with the Twins, but for my money, the Yankees going with Higashioka at the catcher spot is much better than having Gary Sanchez back there. Much better defensive catcher. Whether or not you believe the offense will come for him remains to be seen, but Gary Sanchez hadn't brought that same offense at all in the last 3 years either. From the starting staff, that's where I have the most questions for the New York Yankees. They have one really great starter in Garrett Cole. No questions there. A couple of really decent starters in Jordan Montgomery and Luis Severino. We'll see if Severino can pitch, because he's only pitched 18 innings in the last 3 years. I said 18 innings in 3 years. Not exactly promising. They have a couple of young guys as well, Nestor Cortez as well. They're hoping to get some run out of. Jameson Taillon figures to be in as your number 5 starter. Really nice prospect with the Pirates a number of years ago. Has had some success with the Yankees. Very good starter for them. However, he's also had his issues with injuries, and I don't expect him to be able to pitch the entire season without getting injured again. They don't have much as far as veterans that could come in, make a start or two here or there, so they're going to have to rely on their youth if one of those guys goes down. This is a team that's going to have to trade for a starting pitcher at the deadline, and I expect them to be in on guys like Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea, Tyler Mahle, and Luis Castillo of the Reds. So we'll see if they end up getting those guys. If not, this rotation is very limited, and that's going to be their undoing if they don't solidify that during the season. From a closer's perspective, Aroldis Chapman had his ups and downs last year. Maybe it's all those miles finally catching up to him. Bullpen relief pitchers by trade are up and down players from year to year. Aroldis is because he's been one of the more consistent players over the years is why he's had the contract that he got from the Yankees. But he had his struggles. So we'll see if maybe this is the beginning of the end for him, or maybe he gets some of that relief that he needed in the offseason, all that lockout, maybe rested his arm enough to where he's going to have enough juice to get through the entire season. Let us know in the comment section what you think of the Yankees' playoff chances. But for my money, that starting staff is very limited. We'll see if they can improve it as the season goes on. Just to kind of wrap up, let's go ahead and go over the playoffs, playoff predictions for the AL East. First and foremost, the Baltimore Orioles are not going to make the playoffs. I understand that, even though you might be an Orioles fan, it's just not going to happen. In the 4th spot, I have the Boston Red Sox. I just don't see their starting staff being good enough. The additions of Trevor Story, while helpful, are still reliant on players like Bobby Dahlbeck taking that next step in their career. 3rd, for my money, I have the New York Yankees, and it's because of that starting staff. If their starting staff is able to improve and get another starter in there at the deadline or maybe in the next couple of weeks, they should do much better. However, that lineup still has its holes, still has its on-base issues. The starting staff isn't very good. The bullpen had its difficulties last year. If those things can improve, they could, of course, finish second or even take the division. But for my money, that starting staff is why I'm holding them out. And, of course, that leaves the Rays and Blue Jays for 1 and 2. For my money, I have the Rays finishing second. I just think the Blue Jays have too much going for them. While the Rays have a lot of youth, and they always seem to have enough youth, they're going to finish around that 90-win mark, and I expect the Blue Jays to finish north of that 100-win mark this year, even in a tough AL East. The one advantage that they have is that most of their players are going to be vaccinated, while other teams are going to have vaccination issues coming to play in Toronto. The Yankees, for instance, play 9 games in Toronto this year. Now that the exemption has been set for New York City, that helps them in New York, but it does nothing for them when they move to Toronto for a series. Toronto will have the advantage in those cases, so we'll be able to quickly see which players are and are not vaccinated and which players are not going to be in the lineup for those teams and why those teams are going to be suffering without having that impact in the lineup. Let us know in the comment section what you think about the AL East and how it's all going to shake out. For me, again, Blue Jays take the division. Making the wild card spot are going to be the Rays and Yankees. And then, of course, the Red Sox and Orioles are going to miss the postseason. Let us know in the comments section what you think of all of these different moves by each one of these teams. And thank you again for joining the Upside.